I thought I was finally being accepted by my son-in-law's family when they invited me to an expensive dinner. But after the table was filled with luxury dishes, my son-in-law pointed to a small table near the kitchen and said, "Sit there. My parents aren't used to dining with people from your background." My daughter stayed silent as everyone watched me move away. Moments later, his mother spilled red wine on my shirt and laughed. That old thing was probably cheap anyway. I looked at them and simply said, "I'm fine." But what happened next left them speechless. Before we begin, I am so grateful you are here. Drop a comment and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Your city, your country? I read every single one. Welcome to Dad Family Revenge, where every story carries a lesson worth keeping. Note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message is one I hope stays with you. My hands always knew what to do, even when the rest of me did not. That Friday afternoon in late August, I was on my knees in the backyard garden, pressing fresh soil around the base of the sunflowers my wife Margaret had planted 11 years ago, the summer before she got sick. The heat of the day had softened into something gentler, the kind of warmth that settles into your shoulders and makes you feel, just for a little while, that everything in the world is exactly where it belongs. I am Harold Bennett, 60 years old, a retired carpenter living alone in a 2-bedroom house on a quiet street in Queens, New York. The mortgage has been paid off for 6 years. Every room holds a memory I would not trade, and on evenings like this one, it feels like the most generous place on earth. The garden had been my project since Margaret passed, my way of keeping something of hers alive. She used to say that plants did not need much, just water, sunlight, and someone who bothered to show up. I always thought she was also talking about people when she said that, though she never admitted it. I stood up slowly with full awareness of every joint involved in the process and carried the watering can to the spigot on the back wall. That was when I caught my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. An old man in a faded work shirt, dirt on his forearms, gray at his temples. I looked at that reflection and thought about the white dress shirt folded carefully in the cedar box on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. Margaret had given it to me 4 months before she died. She handed it to me on a Tuesday morning. No occasion, no explanation, wrapped in pale blue tissue paper, tied with a ribbon which was not like her at all. She said, "Wear this to Emily's graduation. I want to see you look proud that day, because I already know I'm going to be too busy crying to look proud for both of us." I wore it. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony and still looked prouder than anyone in that auditorium. I had not worn the shirt since. There was one other thing I had kept quietly for myself, a savings account at a separate bank opened in my name. Only never mentioned to Emily, never referenced in any conversation with Ryan. It was not a large sum, but it was mine, entirely mine, and I had kept it that way with the same quiet stubbornness with which I maintained this garden. Some things a person needs to hold on to just for themselves, not out of selfishness, out of self-preservation. My phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. The screen lit up with Emily's name, and I felt a small, genuine warmth move through my chest. She did not call often, not the way she used to before the wedding. When she did call, I picked up on the first ring. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was bright, almost carefully, so the way a person sounds when they have rehearsed an opening line. "Are you busy tonight?" Next door, my neighbor Diana was deadheading her roses along the fence line. She looked up at the sound of my voice and watched me with an expression I could not quite name. Not quite happy, not quite worried, somewhere in between. I did not think much of it at the time. I went inside, washed the garden dirt from my hands, and climbed the stairs to get the white shirt from the cedar box. I unfolded it, carefully, held it up in the light of the bedroom window. Good cotton, good tailoring, the kind of shirt that held its shape. I slipped it on, buttoned it slowly, stood in front of the mirror. I looked like myself. The version of myself my wife always believed in. I straightened my collar, took one long breath, and went downstairs to catch the subway. The Q train was crowded at 6 in the evening, the way it always was on Friday nights, when the city pulled people in from every direction, like a tide that never quite went out. I stood in the middle of the car, with one hand on the overhead rail, and let the train carry me. Through the tunnel, my reflection ghosted in and out of the dark window across from me, an old man in a white dress shirt standing straight, the fluorescent light catching the cotton in a way that made it look almost new. The shirt still fit the way Margaret had intended it to fit. Straight across the shoulders, clean at the collar. The kind of shirt that did not ask anything of the man wearing it except that he stand up straight. I stood up straight. At Queensboro Plaza, the train rose above ground, and the city spread out on both sides, the lit grids of apartment buildings stacking up against the early evening sky, the expressway threading between neighborhoods, the water catching the last of the light somewhere to the south. I watched it the way I always watched it on this stretch of track, with the particular affection you develop for a view that nobody else considers worth developing affection for. Queens from the elevated Q train was not the view anyone put on a postcard, but it was honest in a way that Midtown, for all its chandeliers and brushed brass lettering, had never managed to be. The train descended back underground. I straightened my collar by feel. The restaurant was on 54th Street, 2 blocks east of the subway exit, tucked between a hotel with a uniformed doorman and a gallery with a single large abstract canvas visible through the window. The name above the entrance was etched in brushed brass small letters, confident spacing the typography of a place that did not need to announce itself, because it assumed you already knew. A second doorman held the glass door open as I approached, without making eye contact, without expression, with the practiced neutrality of someone whose job was to make the threshold feel seamless. I stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Cooler, softer, carrying the smell of warm bread and something floral. I could not identify, gardenia maybe, or something synthetic designed to suggest gardenia. The sound changed too. The noise of 54th Street fell away the moment the door closed behind me, replaced by the low, carefully managed murmur of a room full of people having conversations they considered important. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling that was at least 30 feet high, throwing light in all directions with the generous indifference of objects that do not know what they are illuminating. White tablecloths pressed flat as architectural drawings. Waiters moved between tables with the unhurried precision of people trained to appear as though they have never once been rushed, regardless of what was happening in the kitchen. Every surface reflected light. Every sound was cushioned. The whole room had the quality of a place that had decided by some collective agreement made long before I arrived that nothing unpleasant would ever be permitted to happen inside it. I had the immediate and accurate sense that I did not belong here. Not in a way that embarrassed me. In the way that a carpenter does not belong in a showroom present capable of evaluating what he sees, but not the intended audience. I spotted Emily near the back of the room at a round table by the window that looked out onto the lit-up street. She saw me at the same moment and raised one hand in a small wave, and her smile when she saw me was quick and tight at the corners, in a way I recognized from when she was a teenager, holding herself together in a situation she was not sure about. It was the smile she had worn at her mother's last Christmas, at the graveside service, at her first job interview, which she had called me from the parking lot immediately after, voice bright, in exactly that same careful way. I walked toward her. Ryan stood as I approached. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a French blue shirt, no tie, the kind of effortless-looking outfit that requires considerably more thought than it admits to. He reached out and shook my hand with both of his, which is a gesture I have always found slightly aggressive when performed by someone who is not actually that glad to see you. It uses too much of you. It takes up more space than a handshake needs to. "Ciao, Harold, really glad you could make it," he said, his voice landing at exactly the volume a room like this required, warm enough to suggest sincerity, quiet enough to suggest breeding. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, and I meant it. I had spent 4 years hoping for an evening like this one. I could not have known yet what kind of evening it was actually going to be. The two people already seated at the table rose together with the synchronized ease of people who had spent decades attending events that required synchronized rising. Ryan's father, Charles Caldwell, was a tall man in his mid-60s with silver hair, parted precisely at the left, and the kind of permanent tan that does not come from outdoor work, but from a reliable rotation of winter destinations, the islands, the Riviera, somewhere with a golf course. He extended his hand and said Charles, with the economy of a man who had long since decided that his name was sufficient introduction and that elaborating on it would be a form of redundancy. Ryan's mother was a different kind of presence entirely. I had been calling her Margaret C. in my own mind since the first time I met her 2 years ago at a family gathering in Connecticut, as a way of keeping her separate from my own Margaret, who had been in every way that mattered a completely different kind of woman. My Margaret had gardened in old clothes and laughed at her own jokes and bought a white dress shirt at a department store on Jamaica Avenue 2 weeks after her first round of chemotherapy, because she needed to do something ordinary that afternoon. Margaret C. wore clothes that had been chosen to be noticed and laughed at things because the room expected her to, and had never, as far as I could determine, done anything for reasons that were not at least partly strategic. She extended her hand toward me at a slight downward angle, not quite offering it for a shake, not quite withdrawing it, the gesture of a woman who wanted you to understand that the greeting was a courtesy and not a warmth. She looked me over as I took her hand, starting at my collar, and moving methodically down to my shoes, polished black dress shoes I had shined that afternoon, and then back up to my face. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes did. A small recalibration, a filing away. "You dress simply," she said. Her tone was pleasant. The words themselves were not. "I've always found it easier," I said, and pulled out my chair. A waiter materialized at my elbow, with the quiet, sudden efficiency that only very experienced waiters achieve, appearing without approach, present without arrival. He was perhaps 40, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of steady, watchful eyes that suggested he had seen a great many things at tables like this one, and had developed the professional discipline of observing without reacting. His name tag read James. "Good evening, sir," he said, setting a menu before me with both hands, a small gesture but a considered one. "Can I start you with sparkling water this evening, or still?" "Still is fine," I said. "Thank you, James." He gave me a nod, brief, genuine, the nod of a man who had decided in the first 30 seconds of our acquaintance that I was worth the same professionalism he gave everyone else, which in this room I was already beginning to understand, and was not as universal as it should have been. He moved to the next position at the table. Emily reached across and touched my arm. "I'm glad you're here, Dad," she said, and her voice had something in it that I could not quite categorize, relief, maybe, or apology, or both at once in proportions I could not yet separate. "Me too, sweetheart," I said. The menus were bound in dark leather, heavy and warm to the touch. The kind of menus that do not list prices because the assumption is that if you need to look at the prices, you have already answered your own question about whether you belong here. I opened mine and scanned it with the attention of a man who had already decided he was not going to order anything that required an explanation. Beside me, Ryan was already talking. He talked the way some men talk when they are most comfortable, quickly, assuredly, with the forward momentum of someone who has never experienced a room that failed to follow him. He was describing the restaurant to his parents as though they had not been the ones to suggest it, detailing the chef's background, the sourcing philosophy, the particular vintage of Burgundy he had already selected for the table. Charles nodded with the appreciation of a man who approved of his son's expertise. Margaret C. tilted her wine glass slightly toward the candlelight and examined the crystal with quiet satisfaction. Emily caught my eye across the table. For just a moment something moved through her expression, something tired, something that might have been the very beginning of an apology. Then Ryan said her name to pull her back into the conversation, and she turned away, and the moment closed like a door. James returned to take the orders. Ryan ordered without consulting anyone Maine lobster for the appetizer, Wagyu tenderloin for himself, the rack of lamb for his mother, the sea bass for his father, a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015 at a price I glimpsed on the wine list that made my chest tighten on pure reflex, the way it tightens when you see a number that represents something it should not be representing. "And for you, sir?" James asked, turning to me with exactly the same unhurried professionalism he had given everyone else at the table. No adjustment in tone, no flicker of anything. "The shrimp bisque, please," I said. "Just the bisque." James wrote it down without a flicker of reaction. "Excellent choice, sir. It is very good tonight." I believed him. And I noticed with a clarity I would think about later on the subway home, looking at the wine stain on my shirt in the dark window of the Q train, that he was the only person at this table I believed without reservation. And probably the only one who was actually glad I was there. Ryan lifted his water glass and looked at me across the candles and the crystal with the easy confidence of a man on his own territory. "So, Harold," he said in the particular tone of someone who has been waiting to open a subject and has decided the moment has finally arrived. "That house of yours in Queens, you have been there, 20 years now?" 22, I said. "Property values up there have really moved," he said, nodding slowly, as though we were arriving at this observation together. "That neighborhood has come a long way. Your place must be worth quite a bit by now." I looked at him across the table. His face was pleasant and open, arranged with the careful naturalness of a man who had learned that sincerity is a performance like any other, and had practiced it until the practice did not show. "It is home," I said. "I do not think of it in those terms." Ryan smiled. "Of course," he said. "Of course you do not." He set his glass down. He glanced at his mother, just a glance quick enough that you might not have noticed it if you had not been watching his hands. She gave him nothing visible in return, but something passed between them that did not require visibility. Then he turned back to me with a new expression. Not the social smile, something more deliberate. The expression of a man who has decided to proceed. "Actually, Harold," he said, "there is something we wanted to talk to you about tonight." The candle between us flickered. I set my menu down on the white tablecloth and looked at Ryan with the patience of a man who has spent 30 years on job sites, waiting for clients to say what they actually came to say. In carpentry, you learn early that the first thing a person asks for is almost never the thing they actually need. The real request is usually buried under 2 or 3 layers of preamble pleasantries, flattery, context setting, and the only way to get to it is to stay quiet and wait. You watch their hands. You watch what they do with their eyes. And eventually, if you give them enough room, they tell you the truth. Ryan had very good hands for a man who did not work with them. He held his wine glass with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years in rooms where how you held your wine glass was a kind of language. He set it down now, and leaned back in his chair with the relaxed posture of someone who believed genuinely, and without self-consciousness, that the room was already his. He glanced at his mother. Margaret C. gave him the smallest nod, barely a movement, the kind that belongs to people who have rehearsed a conversation in advance, and are now simply confirming that the moment they planned for has arrived. "We have been thinking," Ryan began, his voice settling into the smooth, unhurried register he used when he was about to propose something he had already decided was going to happen. "About the future, about family, about making sure everyone is in a good position going forward." He paused, letting the words arrange themselves in the air between us. "Emily and I have been looking at a property in Tribeca, a 2-unit building, the kind of thing that builds generational wealth. The numbers are good. The location is exactly right. The timing is exactly right." Another pause, shorter, more deliberate. "The financing is the piece we are still working through. And given how significantly your house in Queens has appreciated over the past few years, the neighborhood has really come a long way. We thought it might make sense to talk about leveraging that asset. As a family." He smiled. "A home equity line of credit, maybe, or something more formal. Frank can help us structure it properly." The mention of Frank's name landed differently than Ryan intended it to. He had met Frank Morrison exactly once at a barbecue 2 summers ago, and had spent the better part of that afternoon asking him questions about New York real estate law that Frank had answered with the diplomatic vagueness of a man who understood he was being interviewed without having been invited to an interview. Frank had mentioned it to me afterward, not with alarm, just with the mild curiosity of someone noting an unusual pattern. I had not thought much about it at the time. I was thinking about it now. I looked at Ryan for a long moment. Then I looked at Emily. She was staring at her plate. Her shoulders had curved inward slightly, and her jaw was tight, and she was turning her fork over and over in her right hand with the small, repetitive motion she had used since high school when she was sitting inside a situation she did not know how to exit. Her eyes, when she finally felt me looking and glanced up, were carrying something I had not seen in them in a long time. Something that looked a great deal like shame. Not embarrassment, which is about being caught. Shame, which is about knowing. She looked away before I did. My heart did something in that moment that I could not have predicted. It did not break. Breaking would have been too dramatic, too final for something that was actually much quieter. It simply settled the way a foundation settles when it has been carrying more weight than it was designed for and has finally shifted into a new position. A position with no memory of what it used to hold. "Sarah Ryan," I said, and my voice came out steady, which surprised me. "That house is where I raised Emily. It is where her mother spent the last years of her life. The mortgage has been paid off for 6 years. It is mine, entirely mine, and it is not an asset I have any interest in leveraging." A flush moved up the side of Ryan's neck. It was quick, and he controlled it quickly, but I saw it because I had been watching his hands, and his hands tightened on the table edge for just a moment before he recovered the smile. "Of course," he said. "It was just a thought. Something worth considering." "I have considered it," I said. "The answer is no." Margaret C. set her wine glass down with a small, precise click and looked at me with the expression of a woman who has decided a conversation has taken an inconvenient turn and intends to redirect it. "Harold," she said, her voice carrying the particular sweetness of someone who is about to say something unkind and has wrapped it carefully so that you cannot object to the packaging. "We are talking about building something for your grandchildren someday. Surely that matters to you." "I do not have grandchildren," I said. "Not yet," she replied, as though that settled something, and reached for her wine. Charles cleared his throat and took a piece of bread from the basket in the center of the table. He buttered it slowly. This was what Charles did when he wanted to signal that he was present, without being accountable for anything currently being said. The appetizers arrived. James moved around the table with the efficiency of someone who had spent years learning to read the temperature of a room and was reading this one correctly. He set the tower of seafood in front of Ryan with a quiet, "Enjoy, sir," placed the rack of lamb before Margaret C., the sea bass before Charles. And then he set my bisque down gently without ceremony, the bowl warm through the white linen napkin he used to carry it, and his eyes met mine for just a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. Not with pity, not with apology. With the clear, direct acknowledgement of someone who has seen exactly what has just happened and wants you to know that you are not invisible. I picked up my spoon. Ryan had already moved on, which was his gift. He had the particular talent of a man for whom a refusal was simply a minor weather event. Something to note, something to navigate around, with the actual destination still clearly in view. He redirected the conversation toward his parents, pulling Emily in with questions she answered in monosyllables while she pushed her lobster across her plate without eating it. Margaret C. laughed at something. Ryan said a full, generous laugh that drew glances from the adjacent table and leaned forward to grip his forearm. Charles refilled his own wineglass. I ate my soup, and I watched them. There is a kind of loneliness that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with tears or accusations or the sharp recognition scenes you see in films. It arrives quietly, almost politely, the way a house guest arrives, who has not been invited, but who you know you cannot ask to leave. I had felt it before the night Margaret died in a hospital corridor in the middle of the night, holding a paper cup of terrible coffee, and understanding, for the first time, what the rest of my life was going to feel like without her in it. I had not expected to feel it again here in this particular room at this particular table with the chandeliers throwing light across everything, like a promise that nothing unpleasant could happen in a room this beautiful. Ryan was talking about projected rental income, now his hands moving with the enthusiasm of a man who loved the performance of knowing things. I watched Emily across the room. In 11 minutes, she had not looked at me once. I know because I counted not deliberately, not angrily, but the way you count things when your mind is doing something else, and your attention has to land somewhere. 11 minutes. Then Ryan turned back to me, as if remembering I was still at the table. He leaned forward and lowered his voice to the register of a confidence. "Harold, I just want you to know, whatever you decide about the house, we genuinely value your support. You have been incredibly generous to us, and that does not go unnoticed." I looked at him. He held my gaze with the practiced steadiness of a man who had learned that sustained eye contact communicates sincerity regardless of whether sincerity is present. "Thank you, Ryan," I said. He smiled and reached for his wine. And then he said it. He said it the way you say something you have been weighing for a long time and have finally decided the moment is right. The wine soft, the parents approving the refusal about the house already filed under weather and moved past. He said it without raising his voice, without any change in expression that would have given the adjacent table reason to look over. He said it the way people say things they genuinely believe are reasonable. "Actually, Harold, I think it would be better for everyone if you moved to that table over there." He tilted his head toward a small two-top near the kitchen doors, half hidden behind a service column, positioned where the kitchen sounds were loudest and the light was thinnest. "My parents are not really accustomed to dining with people from a different background. I am sure you understand." The candle between us flickered again. I turned and looked at the table he was pointing to. It was the kind of table a restaurant places near the service entrance, because it has to put a table somewhere, and that particular somewhere does not matter. I turned back. I looked at Emily. Her fork had stopped moving. Her shoulders had gone completely still, the particular stillness of a person, hoping that if they do not move, the moment will pass over them without requiring them to participate in it. Her lips parted. Her chest rose on a breath that she held for a long moment before releasing it. "Emily," I said. Her name. Nothing else. She looked up. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes are bright, just before something gives way, not with happiness, not with tears yet, but with the pressure of something too large for the space it was being held in. Her lips moved. I watched her chest rise again on another breath, and I waited, and I believed in that moment that she was going to say something. "Just go, Dad," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, don't make this into something. Don't make this into something." I sat with those words for exactly as long as it took me to understand them fully. Then I picked up my bowl of shrimp bisque, pushed my chair back from the table, and stood. James appeared at my side within seconds. I did not see where he came from, only that he was there the way certain people appear exactly when they are needed. He did not say anything. He simply walked with me to the small table near the kitchen doors, set down a clean napkin, and returned 20 seconds later with a bread plate and a pat of butter, which he placed at my elbow without a word. Then he looked at me and gave one brief, deliberate nod, the kind that means "I see you. You are not invisible here." I picked up my spoon. From the main table, the sound of Ryan's laughter rose easily into the warm air of the dining room, as though the past 5 minutes had already been filed away and forgotten, and the evening could now proceed exactly as planned. I ate my soup. I did not look up, but I was already somewhere beneath the grief and the quiet and the bisque that was, I had to admit, genuinely very good. I was already beginning to understand what the rest of this evening was going to require of me, and what the morning after was going to look like, and what I was going to have to do. I ate slowly. I had nowhere to be, and the clarity when it arrived the way clarity always arrived for me, not all at once but incrementally, the way a joint fits together when you have finally cut the angle correctly. Each piece settling into the next, with a rightness that does not require explanation. By the time I finished the last spoonful of soup, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The shrimp bisque was excellent. I noticed this the way you notice small, precise things when the larger things around you have become too large to look at directly. The soup was rich without being heavy, seasoned with something that might have been tarragon, with a heat that built slowly at the back of the throat, rather than announcing itself all at once. It was the kind of soup that deserved better company than the sound of kitchen doors swinging open every 90 seconds, and the faint smell of dish soap drifting out from the service corridor behind me. I ate slowly. I had nowhere to be. From where I sat, I could see the main table clearly, though none of them could see me without turning around, which none of them did. Ryan was in full performance now, his hands moving in those broad, confident arcs he used when he was describing something he wanted you to believe was already inevitable. His father was leaning forward slightly, forearms on the table, nodding with the considered approval of a man being presented with a business proposal he has already decided to endorse. Margaret C. was laughing again, that same full head-back laugh that filled whatever room she was in, the way smoke fills a room gradually and then completely. Emily was eating, or making the motions of eating. She brought her fork to her lips and set it down and reached for her water glass and set that down too. And I watched her go through these small, repetitive gestures with the mechanical quality of a person whose body is present and whose mind has gone somewhere else entirely to avoid having to be present with it. I knew that look. I had seen it on her face at her mother's funeral at the graveside when the pastor finished speaking and the silence came down, and Emily stood very still with her hands clasped in front of her, and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, not crying, not moving, just waiting for the moment to be over. My spoon moved through the soup, and I thought about the night she called me from her apartment in the East Village 3 years into her job at the marketing firm 12:30 on a Wednesday. And I had been asleep for 2 hours already, and I picked up on the second ring because it was Emily, and I had never once not picked up for Emily. "Daddy," she said. She had not called me that in years. "I think they're going to let me go. I think I'm losing my job." "Tell me what happened," I said, and I was already sitting up, already reaching for the light. She talked for 40 minutes. I listened to every word. When she was done, I told her to unlock her door, and I drove the 45 minutes from Queens to the East Village at 1:15 in the morning. Let myself in, and sat with her at her kitchen table until the sky outside the window went from black to gray, to the particular pale gold that means morning has decided to show up whether you invited it or not. I made coffee. We talked about small things, a book she had been reading, a neighborhood restaurant she had been meaning to try. I did not leave until she was calm enough to sleep. I never mentioned it again. Not once. It was not a transaction. It was just what you did. I set my spoon down and pressed my fingers flat against the tablecloth and looked at my hands. 30 years of carpentry had left their record on them. The thickened skin at the base of each finger, the pale scar across my left thumb, where a chisel had slipped in 1987, the knuckle on my right index finger that had been broken and healed slightly wrong, and now predicted rain with reasonable accuracy. These hands had built things: cabinets and staircases and deck railings and a treehouse in the backyard that Emily had used for exactly one summer before declaring herself too old for it, and that I had left standing for 6 more years because I could not bring myself to take it down. These hands had signed checks, a great many checks over a great many years for a great many things I had not asked to be reimbursed for because I had not thought of them as loans. I had thought of them as love. From across the room, Ryan's laughter joined Margaret C's, the two of them harmonizing on something Charles had said, and the sound of it hit me somewhere below my sternum with a dull, heavy pressure that I recognized after a moment as grief. Not anger. Not yet. Just grief, the particular grief of a man who has finally understood something he had been not understanding for a very long time. James appeared at my elbow. "How is the bisque, sir?" he asked, and his voice had that quality of a question that is also something else, a check-in, an acknowledgement, a small hand extended across a distance. "It's very good," I said, and I meant it genuinely. "One of the best I've had." He nodded. He started to move away, then stopped. "Can I bring you anything else? We have a very good bread pudding tonight if you'd like something after." I looked up at him. He was watching me with those steady, careful eyes, and there was nothing performative in his expression. No pity, no discomfort. Just the clear-eyed attention of a person who has decided that you deserve to be treated well, regardless of where you are sitting. "Just the check when you're ready," I said. "Only mine." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "Of course, sir," he said. "I'll take care of that." He walked away, and I watched him go, and I thought in this entire building that man is the only one who has treated me like a guest. I finished the last of the bisque. I folded my napkin and set it beside the bowl and sat back in my chair and allowed myself for just a moment to feel the full weight of the evening. Not to manage it or redirect it or find the practical response to it, but just to feel it the way you have. To sometimes feel the full measure of a thing before you can decide what to do about it. 22 years in that house in Queens. Every mortgage payment made on time, every repair handled, every winter storm weathered. Margaret's garden in the backyard still growing. Emily's treehouse still standing, or it had been the last time I checked, which had been longer ago than I wanted to admit. And across the room, my son-in-law was describing my home as an asset to be leveraged, and my daughter was moving a fork back and forth across a plate of food. She was not eating, and neither of them had turned around once in the past 30 minutes to see whether I was all right. I reached into my jacket pocket and found my phone. I looked at the time. 8:47. Ryan had mentioned the card at dinner casually in passing. The way he mentioned everything he wanted you to forget, he had said. We genuinely value your support. That does not go unnoticed. I thought about that for a moment. Then I opened the banking app, the one linked to the joint credit card I had opened for Emily and Ryan 18 months ago, which was supposed to be for groceries and genuine emergencies. I scrolled through the most recent transactions without meaning to, not looking for anything in particular, just looking the way you look at something, when your hands need something to do and your mind has already begun a process, you have not yet given it permission to start. The last 5 charges were a spa appointment in Midtown, a restaurant in the West Village that I knew cost north of $100, had 2 charges at a boutique in Soho, and a hotel charge in Miami that I had been told at the time was for a work conference. I closed the app. I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the starched linen beneath it, and I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way the doctor had told me to do when my blood pressure was running high. And I thought about Margaret, not Margaret C. across the room, but my Margaret, my wife, the woman who had grown sunflowers in a queen's backyard, and bought me a white shirt in pale blue tissue paper, and told me in one of the last conversations we ever had that I gave too much of myself away. You can't pour from an empty cup, Harold, she had said, and you never check how much is left. James returned with a small leather folder and set it beside my bowl without ceremony. Whenever you're ready, sir, he said. No rush. I opened the folder. The bill read $18. I placed a 20 and a 10 on the tray. 18 for the soup, 2 for the principle of the thing, and 10 more because James had done something tonight that nobody else at this table had managed, which was to treat me like I mattered. I buttoned my jacket. I pushed back my chair, and I stood up for the first time in 40 minutes, and I felt the blood return to my legs and something else return to the rest of me. Something steadier and colder and more purposeful than anything I had walked in here with. I knew what I had to do next. I did not know yet as I turned toward the coat rack near the kitchen corridor to retrieve my jacket that the worst moment of the evening was still 30 seconds away. My jacket was hanging on a hook near the kitchen corridor 6 feet from the main table. 6 feet. That was all the distance there was between me and the exit between this evening and whatever came next. I walked toward it with my eyes ahead, my chin level the leather folder with James's $30 already behind me on the small table by the kitchen doors. I was not going to look at them. I had decided that. I was going to collect my jacket and walk out the front door and hail a cab on 54th Street and let the city carry me home the way it always did, indifferent and efficient, and asking nothing of anyone. I was 2 steps from the hook when Margaret C. pushed back her chair and rose to her feet, lifting her wine glass high with the theatrical confidence of a woman who had spent 62 years being the most important person in whatever room she entered. A toast, she announced loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear her voice carrying the particular music of someone who enjoys being listened to. To family, to the future, and to everything we're building together. Ryan raised his glass, immediately beaming. Charles raised his with the measured enthusiasm of a man who had learned to match his wife's energy without ever quite generating his own. Emily reached for her glass, and I watched her fingers close around the stem and I watched her face arrange itself into the expression of someone who is performing participation rather than feeling it. I reached for my jacket, and that was when Margaret C. turned. She turned to her right to clink glasses with Ryan, and the momentum of the gesture, the wine glass extended, the body pivoting, the laughter already rising in her throat, carried the Cabernet Sauvignon in a wide, generous arc directly onto the left side of my chest. The wine was cold. That was the first thing I registered. Cold and immediate, spreading through the cotton of my shirt, the way water spreads through good fabric quickly, completely, with no negotiation. I stepped back. I looked down. The stain was the color of a wound. It covered my left breast pocket and spread outward in an uneven radius, dark at the center and feathering at the edges, and it was still moving, still expanding, soaking deeper into the cotton. With every second, I stood there watching it. It was Margaret's shirt, the one she had folded in pale blue tissue paper and pressed into my hands 6 months before she died. I had not worn it since Emily's graduation. Margaret C.'s voice cut through the memory like a key change. "Oh, goodness," she said, and she did not sound sorry. She sounded the way people sound when something inconvenient has happened to someone else, and they are performing the minimum required response. She looked at the spreading stain on my shirt, and then, "And I will not forget this for as long as I live," she laughed. A small laugh, bright and careless. "I suppose it didn't cost very much anyway." Ryan's mouth curved. He pressed his lips together, but the amusement was there, visible at the corners of his eyes and the slight lift of his chin. Charles raised his wine glass to his lips and took a long, slow sip, which was his version of the same response. I turned to Emily. She was staring at my chest. Her face had gone very pale, and her lips had parted, and I could see in her eyes the exact moment she understood what she was looking at. Not just a ruined shirt, but that shirt, the one she had seen her father wear to her graduation. The one her mother had bought, the one that existed in her memory, as clearly as it existed on my body. Her eyes filled. She blinked hard once, twice, and the tears receded but did not disappear, and she pressed her lips together and gripped the stem of her wine glass so tightly her knuckles went white. She did not say a word. I reached for the napkin on the nearest empty chair, a linen square pressed and white, and I pressed it to my chest with both hands, holding it there the way you hold pressure against something that is bleeding. My hands were not shaking. I was almost surprised by that. My hands were perfectly steady, the way they always were when the situation required it, the way they had been 30 years ago on every job site where something had gone wrong and someone needed to stay calm, and that someone had always been me. I lifted the napkin away. The stain was not coming out. Not here, not tonight, possibly not ever. Margaret C. had already turned back to her son. She was saying something about the toast, redirecting the table, filling the space where an apology might have gone, with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had never once in her life allowed a moment to become uncomfortable for herself. I put on my jacket. I buttoned it slowly, one button at a time, and I smoothed the front with both palms, and I turned towards the door. "Harold." Ryan's voice. Easy, unbothered. "You heading out?" I turned and looked at him one final time across the candles and the crystal and the wreckage of the evening. He was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the back, with the loose, satisfied posture of a man who had gotten approximately what he came for. "Good night, Ryan," I said. I walked to the front door. The same doorman in the dark blazer held it open. The night air on 54th Street hit me like a correction, cool and indifferent and real. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, with my jacket buttoned over the ruined shirt, and the city moving around me in every direction. Taxis and pedestrians, and the distant percussion of a jackhammer somewhere uptown. I felt underneath the grief and the anger, that was finally quietly beginning to arrive, something else. Something that had not been there when I walked in. Clarity. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The Q train back to Queens was half empty at 9:15 on a Friday night, the weekend crowd still moving in the opposite direction, into the city, rather than out of it. I found a seat by the window and sat with my jacket buttoned, and my hands resting on my knees, and the underground darkness pulling past the glass in long, unbroken ribbons. At Queensboro Plaza, the train rose above ground. The same view it always was, outer Queens in the dark, nobody's postcard more honest than anything I had seen tonight. I pressed 2 fingers against the window glass and felt the vibration of the rails moving through them. I unbuttoned my jacket. The stain on the white shirt had dried into something darker than it had been when it was wet. The color settling from deep red into a brownish maroon at the edges where the fabric had absorbed as much as it was going to absorb. I looked at it for a long time without trying to do anything about it. There was nothing to do about it on a subway train at 9:15 at night. I was beginning to understand, possibly nothing to do about it at all. The train slid into the Forest Hills station, and a young woman got on with a stroller and wrestled it through the doors with the determined competence of a person who had done this many times and had long since stopped expecting help. I stood up and held the door, and she nodded at me a quick, grateful nod, and I sat back down, and the train moved on. I thought about Emily at 8 years old, standing on the back porch on a summer evening, watching me work in the garden, asking me with the philosophical urgency that children bring to questions they have not yet learned, are complicated. "Dad, what's the most important thing?" I had been deadheading roses at the time. I had looked up at her, this small, serious person in bare feet, with a popsicle melting faster than she was eating it, and I had said, "Showing up." "I was showing up where?" she asked. "Wherever someone needs you," I said. She had considered this for a moment, orange popsicle dripping onto the porch boards, and then nodded with the grave satisfaction of a child who has received an answer that confirms something she already suspected. I had spent 24 years trying to live up to that answer. I had shown up at 2 in the morning in the East Village. I had shown up with a check when the rent was short. I had shown up with groceries when Emily said things were tight, with a card on her birthday that always had something folded inside it, with my presence at every dinner and holiday and occasion she had invited me to, sitting at whatever table I was given, and asking for nothing except to be in the same room as my daughter. Tonight, she had handed me over to a table by the kitchen doors and asked me not to make it into something. The train reached my stop. I climbed the stairs from the underground into the warm August night and walked the 4 blocks to my street with my jacket over my arm and the ruined shirt visible to no one because it was nearly 10 o'clock and the sidewalks of Queens were quiet and the neighbors had their lights on behind drawn curtains and nobody was watching. My house was dark when I got to it. I unlocked the front door and went inside and turned on the lamp in the hallway and stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the house settle around me the way old houses do, the creak of the floorboards adjusting to the weight of a person, the tick of the radiator, the faint sound of the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen. I went to the kitchen. I filled the sink with cold water and submerged the shirt jacket off shirt unbuttoned. The whole thing dropped into the basin the way you treat a wound before you have time to think about it properly. The water turned faintly pink. I pressed the fabric down and held it under and watched the color bleed out into the water in slow, faint tendrils. I was still standing there with my hands in the cold water when I heard the knock at the back door. Diana. She was standing on my back steps in a cardigan and slippers, holding 2 mugs with both hands, steam rising from both of them into the night air. Her reading glasses were pushed up on her forehead, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has been watching a neighbor's kitchen light from across the fence for the past 20 minutes and has decided that showing up is better than waiting. "Tea," she said. It was not a question. I dried my hands on the dish towel and held the door open, and she came in and set both mugs on the kitchen table and pulled out a chair and sat down with the ease of a person who has sat at this table many times and does not need to be invited. I sat across from her. I wrapped both hands around the mug. The ceramic was warm and solid, and I held onto it the way you hold onto something when you need your hands to have something real to do. "Tell me," Diana said. So I told her. All of it. The restaurant and the table near the kitchen, and Ryan's proposal about the house, and the way Emily had looked at her plate, and the way Margaret C. had laughed when the wine hit my shirt, and the way Emily had seen it, had recognized it. I was almost certain, and had pressed her lips together and said nothing. I told it the way you tell something when you are hearing it out loud for the first time yourself, when the act of speaking it is also the act of understanding it. And partway through, I had to stop and clear my throat, because something had risen up in my chest that I was not expecting, and it took a moment to settle back down. Diana listened to every word. She did not interrupt. She did not make the small sounds of sympathy that people sometimes make to show they are listening, which I have always found more distracting than helpful. She just listened with her hands around her own mug and her eyes on my face. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. That was not uncomfortable, but was necessary. Then she said, "Harold, when's the last time you actually sat down and looked at everything you've been covering for them, all of it? Added it up?" I opened my mouth. I closed it again. "Not each thing separately," she said. "All of it. Together. As a number." My hands tightened around the mug. The tea inside had gone from hot to warm while I was talking. Outside the kitchen window, the August night pressed dark and close against the glass, and somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something that had moved through the shadows, and the refrigerator cycled off, and the kitchen went very quiet. "I haven't," I said. "Not like that." Diana nodded once. She reached across the table and tapped the back of my hand twice with 2 fingers, not a pat, not a stroke. Just a tap, the way you touch something to confirm it is real. Then she picked up her mug and took a sip and looked at me over the rim. "Maybe it's time," she said, the quiet after. Diana's kitchen light was still on when I pulled the shirt out of the sink. The stain had faded from deep red to a dull rust at the edges. The kind of color that means the damage is done and permanent, and you might as well accept it. I wrung the fabric gently, the way you handle something that has already been through enough, and draped it over the edge of the sink to dry. I stood there looking at it for a while. Margaret had bought that shirt on a day she needed to be ordinary. She had come home hollowed and quiet, and pushed the bag across the table without ceremony. I had worn it the day Emily walked across that stage. Margaret had cried through the entire ceremony. I had stood up straight. Tonight, someone had laughed when the wine hit it. I supposed it didn't cost very much anyway. I turned off the kitchen light and went into my office. The desk lamp threw a narrow circle of yellow across the surface. I sat down and opened the small notebook from the top drawer, the one I used for hardware measurements and contractor phone numbers, and the kind of calculations that need to exist on paper before they become real. I turned to a blank page. I wrote 4 lines. 1. The card. 2. The insurance. 3. The locks. 4. Call Frank. I looked at what I had written for a long time. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs. I did not lie awake. I did not replay the evening frame by frame the way I had expected to. I simply closed my eyes in the dark of the bedroom I had slept in for 22 years, in the house that was entirely mine, and I slept. Some decisions once made allow you to rest. This was one of them. Before I tell you what Frank said that morning, comment the word "still" below, just so I know you are with me. Every comment means more than you know. Note some details here are fictional added for educational purposes. If this is not for you, it is okay to step away now. 6 o'clock. I was up before the sun. Not because I had set an alarm, I had not. But there is a particular quality to the sleep that follows a decision, and it ends cleanly the way tasks end when they are finished rather than abandoned. I lay in the dark for a moment, listening to the house. The radiator, the refrigerator, the particular creak of the third floorboard from the top of the stairs, which had been speaking to me in the same low voice for 22 years. I got up. Downstairs, the white shirt was still draped over the edge of the sink where I had left it. The rust-colored stain at the center had dried completely overnight. In the flat gray light of early morning, it looked smaller than it had felt last night, contained, finished, no longer spreading. I picked the shirt up, held it for a moment. Then I folded it carefully, the way Margaret had taught me to fold good cotton, along the seams, not against them. I placed it on the shelf in the hallway closet behind the winter coats, where it would be out of the way, but not discarded. Some things you do not throw away simply because they have been damaged. Some things you keep because of what they cost the person who gave them to you. I filled the percolator and set it on the stove. While the coffee heated, I stood at the kitchen window and watched the garden come into focus as the light grew. The sunflowers were turned east, the way they always were at this hour. The same patient, unhurried, lean toward the light that they had performed every morning for 11 years. I had stopped finding it remarkable. This morning, I found it remarkable again. The percolator began to knock and hiss. I poured a cup, sat down at the kitchen table, opened the notebook to the page with the 4 lines. I read the 4 lines once. They still said exactly what they needed to say. I read them once. Then I picked up my phone. The bank opened at 9. The insurance company opened at 8:30. Patterson the locksmith, 2 streets over, opened his shop at 8 on Saturdays. I had used him twice before, and knew he worked quickly and without commentary, which was the only kind of service I wanted this morning. Frank I would call at 7. He answered early, he always had. But first I sat for a few minutes more at the kitchen table with my coffee and the morning light coming through the window and the garden outside, doing what gardens do in late August, which is simply to continue patient and rooted and not particularly concerned with anything that was not sun and water and the slow work of growing. I thought that was not a bad way to be. I drank my coffee. Then I picked up the phone and made the first call. The number. The bank representative was polite and efficient. Certainly, Mr. Bennett. That card ending in 4092 is now deactivated. The authorized user will no longer be able to make purchases under this account. Shall I send written confirmation to your email on file? Please, I said. Right away. I drew a line through the first item in the notebook. The insurance company took 11 minutes, including hold time. The representative confirmed that the vehicle removal would take effect within 24 hours per New York State regulations, and that a printed confirmation would be ready for pickup at the Queen's office by noon. I drew a line through the second item. I looked at the third line. The locks. Patterson answered on the second ring and said he could be there by 7:30 if I wanted to be his first appointment. I said yes. Then I looked at the fourth line. Frank Morrison and I had known each other for 31 years since we were both young men on opposite sides of a property dispute in Astoria that had ended after 6 months, and considerable argument with us sitting at a bar on Ditmars Boulevard until last call, talking about everything except law and carpentry. He was the only lawyer I had ever fully trusted, which was also the only reason I had ever needed one. He picked up on the second ring. Harold. His voice was alert in the careful way that told me he had been expecting this call. I've been thinking about you since last night. Last night, I said. Emily called me, he said. Around 10. She wanted to know if I'd heard from you. A pause. I told her I hadn't. I didn't mention I was going to. I set my coffee mug down. My jaw tightened, not at Frank, but at the picture forming. Emily had not called me. She had called sideways toward someone who might intercede, rather than forward toward the person she had wronged. I filed that away without comment. I need to talk to you about the house, I said. I know, Frank said. And Harold, there is something I should have told you sooner. He cleared his throat the way Frank did when he was organizing something precise before he said it. About 6 weeks ago, a colleague of mine called me. Real estate attorney practices out of Midtown. Someone had approached him asking about the process of adding a co-owner's name to an existing residential property deed in Queens. Primary owner, male, 60s, long-term residence, no outstanding mortgage. A pause. My colleague thought the situation sounded familiar and asked if I knew anything about it. My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my own pulse against the case. I told him I thought I knew whose house he was describing. Frank continued. He confirmed it when I pushed him. The person asking the questions was Ryan Caldwell. The kitchen was very bright. Outside, the sunflowers were turning toward the east, patient and unhurried. I sat at my kitchen table and felt something settle into place with the quiet finality of a joint that has been fitted correctly after a long time of sitting wrong. Ryan's question at the dinner table, that easy, pleasant inquiry about property values in Queens, had not been curiosity. It had been reconnaissance. How do I protect the house, Frank? I asked. My voice came out steady. I was glad of that. You already started, Frank said. You called me. Come in Monday morning and we will put it in writing, a formal document establishing sole ownership with explicit language requiring your voluntary notarized consent for any future transfer or addition of rights. He paused. Harold, are you all right? I looked out at the garden, at the sunflowers, at the house Margaret had chosen and the yard she had planted, and the life I had built inside both of them. I'm getting there, I said. I hung up, crossed Frank's name off the list, and put on my shoes. Patterson opened in 20 minutes, and I wanted to be his first appointment of the morning. The ledger. I should tell you what I did before I slept that Friday night, because it matters to what happened Saturday morning. Diana's question had stayed with me from the moment she left, and that night, after I had written the 4 lines in the notebook and turned off the desk lamp, I found I could not let it rest. I went back to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The banking portal loaded in 30 seconds. I typed my password, Margaret's birthday, unchanged for 11 years, because changing it had always felt like losing something, and sat back as the account summary filled the screen. I had 4 accounts. The joint credit card listed me as primary cardholder and Emily as authorized user. That meant the card carried my name, my credit score, and my legal responsibility for every dollar charged to it. I started with the statements. 4 years. Every line. The way I used to read blueprints, slowly, methodically looking for what was actually there, rather than what I expected to find. The rent payments came first. 11 of them over 4 years, each $1,200 paid whenever Ryan's commission checks apparently failed to arrive on time. $13,200. I wrote it in the notebook. The insurance records were next. 8 renewal periods on Ryan's BMW at $890 each, $7,120. I wrote that below the first number. Then the credit card charges line by line. A spa appointment in Midtown, $340. Same week, Emily called about a medical bill. A boutique in Soho, $1,200. A resort in Cancun, $2,800. Same week, Emily texted that things were really tight. I added everything up. The total underlined twice at the bottom of the page was $47,340. I looked at that number for a long time. $47,000. 3 years of careful savings. The cost of a new roof. A reliable car. 2 years of groceries. Extracted not all at once, but incrementally over 4 years, through a door I had left open and never thought to examine. I closed the laptop. I did not feel rage. What arrived instead was something quieter. The clean, cold clarity of a man who has finally understood a structural problem he has been standing in front of for years. I turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. Some truths once seen clearly allow you to rest. I slept. Before I tell you what she said, leave the word Dad in the comments. It lets me know you are still here. Still here, and that this story found the right person. Note this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and reflection. If it is not for you, please feel free to step away. I respect that completely. Before 9, Patterson had the locks changed by 8:50. He was a compact man in his late 50s who had been rekeying doors in this neighborhood since before half the current residents were born. He changed the front deadbolt, the back door handle lock, and the side garage entry, handed me 3 sets of new keys, and was gone before 9 without having said more than a dozen words total, which was exactly the service I had called him for. I stood in the front hallway holding the keys. They were brass and clean, and had not yet been worn smooth by anyone's hands. I put 1 set in my jacket pocket, 1 in the kitchen drawer, and the 3rd in the small fireproof box in the bedroom closet beside the deed to the house. The deed. My name. Only mine. The way it had always been, and the way it was going to stay. I made coffee and took it to the back porch, and sat in the wooden chair I had made myself the summer Emily turned 12, built from leftover lumber, and still holding every pound I had ever put on it, and listened to Queens wake up around me. A lawn mower 2 blocks over. Children somewhere with the shapeless joy of kids with nowhere they had to be. The sparrow in Margaret's sunflowers moving from stalk to stalk. My phone rang at 9:40. Ryan. I watched the screen until it stopped. 9:52. Ryan again. 10:08. Emily. 10:23. Ryan. 10:31. Emily. 10:44. Ryan twice in 3 minutes. I sat on the back porch with my coffee and let them ring. I had spent a long time in my life answering phones, because not answering felt unkind. This morning, not answering felt accurate. At 10:30, I went inside and listened to the voicemails in order. Ryan's first message was controlled. Give me a call, we need to sort a few things out. His second was less so, there might be a bank error, please call me. His third had shed all pretense, the card is canceled. I know it's canceled, call me right now. Emily's first message was quiet. Dad, I know you're upset. Please call me back. Her second was quieter. The words arriving closer together, the careful composure coming apart underneath them. Dad, the restaurant bill was $3,400, and our cards barely covered it. And Ryan is really stressed, and I just need you to call me. $3,400. For a dinner I had been asked to leave. I closed the voicemail app. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it on the rack and was drying my hands on the dish towel when I heard the sound of a car coming down my street, faster than the residential limit, and the particular noise of brakes applied by someone stopping in a hurry rather than arriving with intention. I walked to the front window and looked through the curtain. Ryan's BMW was in my driveway. I set down the dish towel and walked to the front door. The other side of the door, I opened the heavy wooden door all the way. Then I stood behind the locked screen and looked at the two of them on my porch, Ryan with his jaw set and his eyes carrying the specific brightness of a man who has spent a morning being told no by automated phone systems and has arrived in person to reverse the outcome. and Emily standing slightly behind him, with her shoulders curved inward, and her face holding an expression I had not seen since she was a teenager. Caught between two things she did not know how to choose between. Ryan raised his knuckles and rapped 3 times against the doorframe. Sharp, certain. I was already there. "Go ahead," I said before he could arrange the words. Something shifted in his expression. A small recalibration, the first sign that this conversation was not going to proceed as rehearsed. He took a breath and began. The card was canceled. Without warning, Emily depended on that account. I had no right to pull it. Without notice, there must be some way to resolve this today. I let him finish. "The account is in my name," I said. "I'm the primary cardholder. Under the terms of the account agreement, I can cancel any authorized user card at any time without advance notice. That is not a matter of opinion. That is what you agreed to when the card was issued." Ryan's jaw tightened. "That's a technicality." "It's a contract," I said. "There is a difference." Emily stepped forward. "Dad." Her voice had the texture of something that had been through too much and was running close to its limit. "Can we please just come inside and talk about this?" I looked at her for a long moment. I felt the pull of it 24 years of opening doors when Emily asked me to. The effort of not doing it now was physical, the way certain kinds of restraint are physical. "We can talk," I said. "Right here is fine." Ryan made a sound of frustration he did not quite manage to contain. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his key ring. He pushed the key into the new lock with the confidence of a man who believes he has located a solution. He turned it left. Nothing. Right. Nothing. He pushed harder. The door did not move. The lock did not yield. The confidence drained from his face in real time, and what replaced it was something I had not seen there before. Something that looked under the expensive clothes and the sleepless night and the morning of declined transactions like the first honest thing about him I had ever witnessed. "It's not stuck," I said quietly. "I had the locks changed this morning." I reached into my jacket pocket for the envelope. The envelope. I pushed the envelope through the gap at the side of the screen door. It fell to the porch boards between Ryan's feet, a white envelope standard size containing the printed insurance removal confirmation I had picked up from the Queen's office that morning. Ryan stared at it. "That is written confirmation that your vehicle has been removed from my insurance policy," I said. "The removal is effective as of tomorrow morning, per New York State regulations. Do not drive that car until you have your own policy in place. Driving an uninsured vehicle in New York carries fines starting at $1,500 and a license suspension of up to 1 year. Ryan looked up from the envelope. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and I watched something shift in his expression. His mother's name from the speed of the reaction. He raised the phone to his ear. "Yeah." A pause. Then Margaret C.'s voice came through the speaker clearly enough. "Ryan, just get him to cooperate. We are not spending our entire weekend dealing with this." I looked at Ryan steadily across the screen door. He lowered the phone. "Tell your mother," I said quietly, "that I said hello." Something moved across his face that I had no name for, not anger, not embarrassment, but something raw, the expression of a man who has just understood that the person on the other side of this door knows considerably more than he was supposed to know, and has known it longer than tonight. He looked at Emily. She was looking at me. Her cheek was still wet. Her arms had uncrossed sometime in the last few minutes, and now hung at her sides, and her eyes were moving over my face with an expression that had stopped trying to be anything strategic and was simply present. tired and present and more honest than anything I had seen from her in a very long time. "This is not about last night," I said. I was speaking to both of them now, but I was looking at Emily. "Last night was when I finally paid attention to something that had been true for a long time. The card, the insurance, 4 years of covering things that should not have been mine to cover because I loved you, Emily, and because I told myself that was what family meant." I paused. I was wrong about that. Or I was right about it, and the lesson was wrong. Emily's throat moved. She pressed her lips together. Ryan put his hand on her arm. "Let's go." Flat. Final. He's made his decision. Emily let herself be turned. She walked down the porch steps without looking back, and I stayed at the screen door and watched them go. The BMW backed out faster than necessary. The engine sound faded down the street. I pushed the wooden door closed and stood in the front hallway with my hand on the new deadbolt, feeling the solid, unfamiliar weight of it under my palm. Then I went to put the kettle on. The kettle boiled in 4 minutes. I poured the water over the chamomile bag and carried the mug through the living room and out the back door into the garden. And I sat down in the old oak chair I had built from scrap 20 years ago and let the morning hold me for a while without asking anything of it. The sunflowers were still there, still turning, still doing exactly what they had always done, which was face the light and grow toward it, and not concern themselves with anything that was not light. I had been sitting there for perhaps 20 minutes, the tea gone warm in my hands, when I heard Diana's gate. She came around the side of the house the way she always did, without announcement, without apology, as though my backyard were a place she had standing permission to enter, which I supposed after 15 years of neighboring she did. She was carrying a square baking dish covered in foil and wearing a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has been watching a situation develop from next door and has decided that the appropriate response is food. "Apple cake," she said, setting the dish on the small table beside my chair. "I made it last night when I couldn't sleep." "You couldn't sleep," I said. She gave me the look that meant the question did not require an answer, pulled the other chair closer, and sat down. She peeled back the foil from one corner of the dish. The smell of cinnamon and warm apple filled the back porch air and hit me somewhere below my sternum that I had not expected to feel anything. "They came," I said. "I saw the car." She handed me a fork. "How did it go?" "The way it needed to," I said. She nodded, as if this answered something she had already mostly known, and cut a piece of cake with the side of her fork and ate it without further comment. That was what I valued most about Diana. She understood that some things did not need to be processed out loud immediately, that sometimes a person needed to sit in a garden with someone they trusted and eat apple cake and let the morning be what it was. We ate from the dish together, passing the fork back and forth, and the sparrow that had been working through the sunflower seed heads moved on to the fence post and regarded us with the alert, unimpressed attention of a bird that has seen a great many people sit in gardens and has not yet found it remarkable. My phone rang. Frank. I picked up on the first ring. "I finished the document this morning," he said without preamble. "Sole ownership declaration with explicit protective language. Any future attempt to add a name to the deed, transfer any portion of ownership rights, or use the property as collateral requires your written consent notarized and witnessed in person. I've also added a clause that flags any title searches on the property to my office automatically." He paused. "Come Monday, sign it, and Ryan Caldwell will never be able to do what he was trying to do. Not without your knowledge and not without your consent. Thank you, Frank, I said. Don't thank me, he said. I should have called you 6 weeks ago when my colleague first reached out. That's on me. Another pause, briefer. Harold, are you all right? Actually all right, not the version of all right you tell people. I looked out at the garden, at the sunflowers that Margaret had planted in the first summer after we moved in back, when Emily was 8 years old, and the house was new to us, and everything still felt like it had the capacity to become exactly what we hoped. At the fence, Diana had helped me repaint 2 summers ago. At the old oak chair under me built from scrap wood and still holding. I think I'm going to be all right, I said. The real version. Frank made a sound that might have been satisfaction. Monday, he said. 9 o'clock. I put the phone down on the arm of the chair. Diana raised her eyebrows. The house is protected, I said. Frank drafted a document. I sign it Monday and it's done. Diana exhaled slowly, not with surprise, but with the deep, releasing breath of a person who has been holding something tightly on someone else's behalf and has just been told they can let it go. She reached across and tapped the back of my hand twice with 2 fingers. Quick, firm, certain. Good, she said. We finished the cake. The sparrow left the fence post and disappeared into the sunflowers again. Down the block, someone started a lawnmower, and the neighborhood absorbed the sound, the way neighborhoods absorb all sounds on Saturday afternoons, easily, without interruption, folding it into the general grammar of a day going about its business. I opened the notebook on my knee to a fresh page past the 4 crossed-off lines. I wrote slowly. Replace porch railing. Patch kitchen window frame before winter. Fix garden gate it has been dragging since April. Buy proper porch chairs, solid oak built to last, not scrap. I looked at the list. 4 things I had been meaning to do for myself for a long time that had kept getting pushed back by other people's urgencies. Not anymore. Diana took the cake dish and said she would leave the rest on my counter. I told her I would eat it. She went back through the gate and I sat alone in the garden for another half hour doing nothing in particular, which was something I had not permitted myself in longer than I could account for. The sun moved. The shadows shifted. The house behind me was quiet and warm and entirely mine. I closed the notebook. I went inside. I was still in the garden when I heard the footsteps on the front porch. Not Ryan's footsteps. His were heavier, more deliberate, the footsteps of a man who walked as though the ground owed him something. These were lighter and slower, the footsteps of someone who was not entirely sure they had the right to be making them. I set down my notebook and walked through the house to the front door. Emily was standing on the porch alone. Ryan's BMW was still at the curb engine idling, and I could see the shape of him through the windshield. Sitting with both hands on the wheel, staring forward, the posture of a man who has decided to wait without admitting he is waiting. Emily had her back to the car. She was looking at the front door, and when I opened it and stood behind the screen, she looked at me with an expression that had stopped trying to be anything strategic. She was just tired, genuinely bone-tired, the kind that comes not from one bad night, but from a long time of working very hard to hold something together that perhaps did not deserve that much effort. I sent him to wait, she said. I need to talk to you, just us. I pushed the screen door open slightly, not enough to invite her in, but enough to signal that I was listening. She did not try to come in. She stood where she was, arms loose at her sides now, rather than crossed over her chest, which I noticed because it was different from every other version of this conversation she had tried to have today. I know you're not going to change your mind about the card or the insurance, she said. I'm not here about that. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm making excuses, and I don't want to make excuses, so I'm just going to say it plainly. All right, I said. I knew it was going to be a hard night, she said. When I called you last Friday, I knew what Ryan's parents were like. I knew what Ryan was like when he wanted to impress them. Her voice tightened around the edges but held. I should have warned you. I should have said, Dad, this might be uncomfortable. You should know what you're walking into. But I didn't because I told myself it would be fine, and I wanted it to be fine, and I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it wouldn't be. She exhaled sharply through her nose. That was cowardice. I know that. I looked at my daughter, at the lines of tiredness around her eyes, at the way she was standing, not performing composure, not managing the conversation, just standing there with the truth of what she was saying, visible on her face the way feelings are visible when a person stops trying to arrange them. The table, I said. She flinched. Yes. And the shirt. Her throat moved. Dad. Her voice broke on my name and she stopped jaw tight, fighting it. Then she looked directly at me with wet, clear eyes and said, I knew what that shirt was the second the wine hit it. I knew it was the one Mom bought. I sat there and I knew, and I said nothing. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment hard, then lowered it. That is the thing I am going to have to live with. Not Ryan's behavior. Mine. I chose to sit there and say nothing, and I have no excuse for that, and I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. The words landed the way true. Apologies land not with relief exactly, but with weight. The weight of something real being placed between two people who have been walking around it for too long. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I hear you, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I hear every word of that, Emily. She was crying now. Not dramatically, not collapsing. Just crying the way adults cry when they have been holding something for a long time and have finally said it out loud, tears moving steadily down both cheeks while she stood straight and did not look away. I'm not the same person I was before I met Ryan, she said. I know that. I've known it for a while. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, a gesture so familiar it knocked the breath out of me for a moment. She had done that same thing since she was 6 years old, the back of the wrist, never the palm. I don't know what I'm going to do about that yet, but I know I don't want to keep being that person. That's enough, I said. That's enough to start with. She nodded quick and small, the way she used to nod when she was a child, and had been told something she was going to hold on to. From the curb, a car horn sounded. Short, impatient. Emily closed her eyes briefly, 1 second too, and the expression that crossed her face in that moment was so unguarded that it told me more than anything she had said. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me. I have to go, she said. I know, I said. She turned, walked down the porch steps. At the bottom, she stopped her hand on the railing, her back to me. Her shoulders rose on a breath and fell. I love you, Dad, she said, not turning around. I love you too, Em, I said. That has never been the question. She let go of the railing and walked to the car. Ryan's window came down as she reached the passenger side, and I heard his voice, low, clip the voice of a man who has been waiting in a hot car and is not interested in what took so long. Emily got in without responding to whatever he said, and the BMW pulled away from the curb and moved down the street and turned at the corner and was gone. I stood behind the screen door for a long time after the sound of the engine disappeared. Then I went back to the garden. 3 months passed. Not quietly, 3 months never pass quietly in New York, where the city generates noise and change and consequence, whether you are paying attention or not. But they passed in a way that felt for the first time in a long time like they belonged to me. I replaced the porch railing in September. It took me 4 days working in the evenings after dinner, and I did it properly, pressure-treated, lumber, galvanized, screws. The corners joined the way I had learned in my first year of carpentry, before I knew enough to take shortcuts, and long after I had stopped taking them. When it was done, I stood on the front steps and looked at it in the early autumn light, and felt the particular satisfaction that comes from making something with your hands that will outlast the making of it. The garden gate I fixed in October on a cool Saturday morning, when the maples on the block had gone full amber, and the air smelled like the season changing its mind about something. The gate had been dragging since April. I had noticed it every time I went out to the garden and told myself I would get to it, and then something else had required my attention, and I had not gotten to it. This time there was nothing else. I got to it. The oak porch chairs arrived on a Wednesday in late October, delivered by a man from the Woodside workshop, who carried them up the front steps one at a time and set them on the repaired porch without ceremony. I sat in one immediately without taking off my jacket and decided they were exactly right. My finances told a cleaner story than they had in 4 years. Without the credit card charges, the insurance premiums, and the irregular transfers that had been leaving my account since Emily and Ryan's first difficult month together, I was saving more in a single month than I had managed in the previous 6. I signed the deed protection document in Frank's office on a Monday morning in early September, shook his hand, and walked back to the Forest Hill subway station feeling lighter than I had in years. The house was mine. It always had been. Now there was paperwork that said so in language no one could talk around. Ryan and Emily's situation rearranged itself the way things do when they have been built on expectation rather than foundation. The Tribeca deal Ryan had been describing to anyone who would listen as the transaction that would change everything collapsed in late September. The buyers hired an independent appraiser whose assessment came in 30% below Ryan's evaluation, and they walked. There were conversations in the real estate community afterward, the quiet, career-defining kind that do not appear in writing but leave marks that do not wash out. By October, Ryan and Emily had given up the Manhattan apartment and were renting a 2-bedroom in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. Emily texted me that she had left her job and was figuring out what came next. I replied that I hoped she found something better. She sent back a single word and a period, thanks. Then there was James. I had not thought much about the confirmation email from the restaurant until Diana appeared at my back door on a Sunday morning in October, holding her phone with the expression of someone delivering news they find both satisfying and entirely just. James had posted a video the night of the dinner sitting in his car in the restaurant parking garage after his shift. He had not used names. He had not identified the restaurant. He had simply described in a quiet and unhurried voice what he had witnessed: an older man in a white shirt who had been asked by his own family to sit at a different table, and how the only thing James could think to do was bring him bread, and how the man had looked up and nodded and gone back to his soup. With a dignity that James said he found himself thinking about on the drive home and on the drive to work the next morning and every morning since. The video had 2.3 million views. Diana held the phone toward me. "That's you," she said. "I know," I said. I watched it twice, standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee going cold in my other hand. The comments ran to thousands of people from every state and several countries, writing about their own versions of that table that night. That moment of being told in one form or another that they did not belong where they were sitting. A woman in Ohio who had been asked to eat in the kitchen at her in-laws' house for 7 years before she finally stopped going. A man in Georgia who described nearly the same dinner, nearly the same silence from his spouse, nearly the same walk, to a smaller table in a corner of a room that was supposed to be his family's. The restaurant manager had emailed me 3 weeks later. James had told his manager the truth the morning after, names included, because he believed the right people should know, and the manager had found Frank's name through the restaurant's own reservation records, which had been made under Emily's account. Frank forwarded the email to me. The email was professional and genuinely apologetic. It included a full refund of $18 and a gift card for $200. I used the gift card to take Diana to dinner at an Italian place on Queens Boulevard she had been talking about for months. She ordered the lamb. I had the soup. We were there for 2 hours and laughed more than I had laughed in longer than I could account for. And when the check came, I paid it without looking at the amount, which was a thing I had not done in a restaurant in years, and it felt exactly as good as I thought it would. Emily called on a Wednesday evening in late October. I was in the garden raking leaves, and I picked up on the second ring. "Hi, Dad." Careful, not rehearsed. Different. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "I just wanted to see how you were doing," she said. "That's all. I don't need anything. I just wanted to call." We talked for 11 minutes. About the garden, about the new porch chairs, about a book she had been reading about someone who left a career they were good at to do something they actually wanted. She did not mention Ryan. I did not ask. When she said goodbye, her voice had the quality of someone who has put something heavy down and is not yet sure what to do with their hands now that they are empty. I stood in the garden after we hung up, rake in hand, and felt something I recognized after a moment as hope quiet, careful, the kind that does not make promises. A week later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon in November, it began to rain. I was reading in the front room when I heard the car. Not Ryan's BMW. I knew that sound, had known it for 3 years, the particular idol of an engine that costs more than it should and knows it. This was something older. Something that ran with minor hesitations, the automotive equivalent of a person who is doing their best with what they have. I looked out the window. A faded blue sedan I did not recognize was pulling slowly to the curb in front of my house. The engine cut off. A moment passed. Then the driver's door opened, and Emily stepped out into the rain. She was not dressed for it. A plain gray jacket, not the expensive wool coat from the restaurant 3 months ago. She did not run to the porch. She walked the deliberate walk of someone who has decided to do something and has decided equally firmly not to let herself back out of it. She was carrying 2 paper cups from a coffee shop I recognized immediately. The diner on Junction Boulevard, 2 miles from my house, that she used to stop at when she visited, before Ryan had opinions about where coffee should come from. I opened the front door before she reached the steps. She looked up at me from the bottom of the porch, rain darkening her hair, holding both cups out slightly, an offering or an explanation, or both. Her face was bare of the careful makeup she usually wore, and without it, she looked younger and more tired, and more like herself than she had in a long time. "I should have called first," she said. "You didn't need to," I said. And I meant it. I pushed the screen door open and led her to the new oak chairs on the front porch, out of the rain, but inside the sound of it. I did not invite her inside the house. The porch felt right. She handed me a cup. Black, no sugar, she had remembered or had never forgotten. "Ryan knows I'm here," she said before I could ask. "He didn't come because he knows he's not welcome, and this isn't about him anyway." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I've been seeing a therapist, 6 weeks now. She keeps asking me what I actually want, separate from what Ryan wants, separate from what I think I'm supposed to want." She looked at the rain falling on the front yard. "It's harder to answer than it sounds." Most honest questions are, I said. She nodded, took a breath. I owe you an apology that's better than the one I gave you on the porch 3 months ago. That one was real, but it was also rushed, and Ryan was in the car, and I was still. She stopped, started again. I was still partly managing the situation instead of just being in it. And now, I said. She looked at me directly. Her eyes were wet but steady. Now I'm just in it. She set her cup down on the arm of the oak chair and turned to face me fully. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her knuckles pale with the pressure of holding them together, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice of someone who has rehearsed something true and is now saying it for the first time without the rehearsal. I knew what that shirt was, she said. The moment the wine hit it, I knew. I remembered Mom buying it. I remembered your face when you wore it to my graduation. I remembered everything about that shirt. Her jaw tightened, held. And I sat there and I said nothing, because I was afraid of what would happen if I said something, and that fear mattered more to me in that moment than you did. A tear moved down her left cheek, and she let it go. I have to live with that. I know I do. I just need you to know that I know. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the particular ache of watching someone you love tell you a hard truth about themselves. I hear you, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Every word. She exhaled long, shaking 3 months of weight in it. Her shoulders dropped. She picked up her coffee and held it in both hands and looked out at the rain, and I looked at her. This woman who had my wife's eyes and my own stubbornness and 32 years of a life. I had tried my best to give her a good start in, and I felt the anger that I might have expected to feel simply not there. What was there instead was something older, something that had been waiting a long time to be allowed to exist. I accept your apology, I said. I mean that fully. She pressed her lips together and nodded and did not try to speak for a moment, which was the right choice. Things are different now, I said. I love you. That is not going to change. But I will not be the safety net anymore, not for the lifestyle, not for the bills, not for any of it. That part is finished. I know, she said. Not defensively, not with argument, just acknowledgement, clean and complete. I'm not here for that. I promise you, I'm not here for that. We sat with that for a while. The rain steady on the porch roof, the street glistening under the gray November sky. Her coffee steamed. Mine cooled. A car moved slowly past the house headlights on in the early dark of the afternoon. The chairs are good, she said finally. I looked at them, solid, well-made, chosen deliberately. First furniture I've bought for myself in 20 years, I said. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. They suit you, she said. The rain began to ease around 4 o'clock. Not all at once. November rain never stops all at once in Queens. It pulls back gradually, the way a tide pulls back after it has done what it came to do, leaving the street glistening under the early streetlights, and the bare oak tree at the edge of my property, standing patient against the darkening sky, holding nothing and losing nothing. Emily and I had been sitting on the front porch for a long time by then. Her coffee had gone cold. Mine too. We had stopped trying to fill the space between us with words, which was something that had not happened between us in years, this particular kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable but necessary, the kind that only exists between two people who have finally said what they actually needed to say and are now simply sitting inside the aftermath of having said it. She was looking at the front yard with an expression I recognized from a long time ago. Not resolution, not contentment, but the quiet of a person who has put something down that they have been carrying for too long and is not yet sure what to do with their empty hands. I recognized it because I had worn it myself, the night Margaret died in the hospital corridor after the doctor came out, and I understood from his face before he spoke that there was nothing left to understand except the fact itself. I had sat in a plastic chair for 40 minutes, not crying, not moving, just present inside a thing that had happened and could not be made to unhappen. Emily did not look like that now. What she looked like was someone standing at the beginning of something, rather than the end of something, which is a different kind of quiet entirely. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. She was still looking at the yard. "You and me. Not the money, not Ryan, just us." I thought about that question with the full seriousness it deserved. I did not reach for the easy answer, though the easy answer was right there, and I knew exactly what it sounded like and how much she wanted to hear it. "I think we're going to find out," I said. "And I think that is a more honest answer than the one I would have given you a year ago, which would have been yes without thinking about it." She turned and looked at me. Something moved across her face, not hurt, but recognition. The small, quiet acknowledgement of what that habit had cost us both over the years. How many times I had said yes without thinking about it. How many times that yes had been mistaken for something it was not. Then, and I will remember this for a long time, she smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind that arrives after something hard and means considerably more because of it. The kind that does not try to be anything other than what it is. "Okay," she said. "That's enough." She stood and straightened her jacket and picked up both empty cups, holding them the way you hold things when your hands need something to do while the rest of you finishes being somewhere. She looked at me the way a person looks when they have more to say and have made the correct decision that tonight has already held enough. I stood too. We were both on our feet now on the new oak porch in the gray November afternoon, and I looked at my daughter, this woman who had my wife's eyes and my own stubbornness and 32 years of a life I had tried my best to give a good foundation, and I felt something I had not let myself feel in a long time. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope and more durable. The sense that what was broken between us was not beyond repair, and that repair did not have to happen all at once. And that the most important thing that had happened today was not the apology or the accepted apology or the new terms I had laid out clearly and without anger. The most important thing was that we had told each other the truth. For the first time in years, without performance, without management, without either of us trying to arrange the conversation into a shape that would allow us to avoid the hard center of it. That was worth more than I had words for standing on a porch in the rain. At the bottom of the porch steps, she paused. Her hand went to the railing. Her back was to me and her shoulders rose on a long breath and fell. "I'll call," she said. "Not because I need something, just to call." "I'll answer," I said. She walked to the faded blue car at the curb. She did not look back. Emily had never been a person who looked back even as a child. Even leaving for her first day of school, even the day she moved to Manhattan at 23, with 2 suitcases and a certainty about the future that I had found both terrifying and entirely her. But as she reached the car door, she raised one hand, a small wave, brief and real, the kind that is not asking to be seen, but means something whether it is or not. The car started. The headlights came on in the early dark. She pulled away from the curb slowly and moved down the wet street and turned at the corner and was gone. I stood on the porch for a while after the sound of the engine faded. The neighborhood was settling into its Friday evening porch lights coming on one by one down the block, the smell of someone's dinner drifting through a window somewhere on the street, the distant sound of a television from the house 2 doors over where the Pattersons always watched the news at this hour. Ordinary things. Faithful things. The kind that do not ask anything of you and do not go anywhere. The kind that were here before any of this and would be here long after. I thought about what Frank had said to me on the phone 3 months ago when I had asked him if I was all right, and he had asked me back which version I meant. I thought about Diana, who had sat across from me at this kitchen table in August with 2 mugs of tea and asked a single question that changed the direction of everything. I thought about James, who had brought me bread at a small table near the kitchen doors of a restaurant in Midtown, and given me a nod that cost him nothing and meant everything. And I thought about Margaret. I thought about the way she used to say that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and that I never checked how much was left. She had told me that more than once over the years in different contexts, always with the patience of a woman who understood that some lessons have to be offered multiple times before they are actually received. She had been right about that, the way she was right about most things that mattered, with a directness that was never cruel and a clarity that never required raising her voice. I had spent 4 years after she died trying to honor her by showing up for Emily the way I had shown up for Margaret. What I had not understood until a Friday night in August in a restaurant on 54th Street was that showing up for someone and allowing yourself to be taken from are 2 different things, and the difference between them is self-respect. Margaret had known that. She had tried to tell me. I had needed to learn it the harder way, which was the way I had always learned things, by doing them wrong first, and then understanding precisely why they were wrong, and then doing something different. The garden was resting under the November sky. The sunflowers had gone to seed months ago, their heavy heads bowing low in the way they did each autumn, returning everything they had gathered over the summer back into the ground. Underneath the surface, patient and unhurried, the roots were holding everything the garden would need for spring. The garden always came back. It had come back every year for 11 years since Margaret planted it. It would come back again. I picked up my empty cup. I went inside. The house was warm. The hallway lamp cast the same amber light it had cast every evening for 22 years across the same floorboards that creaked in the same 3 spots I had long since memorized. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and something warm, the ghost of the apple cake Diana had brought 3 months ago, which had become its own kind of memory now. The deed to the house was in the fireproof box in the bedroom closet, protected by a document Frank had drafted, and I had signed in language clear enough that no one could talk around it. The house was mine. It had always been mine. Now everything about it, the deed, the locks, the mortgage, paid off 6 years ago. The garden in the back, the new porch railing I had built in September, the solid oak chairs on the front porch, chosen deliberately and paid for without asking anyone's opinion, was simply quietly, entirely mine. I stood in the kitchen for a moment and looked at nothing in particular and felt it, that specific feeling that I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. Not triumph, not relief. Something steadier than either. For the first time in a very long time, I was not carrying anyone else's weight, and I had not realized how heavy it was until the moment I put it down. I washed my cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet where it belonged. I went to the window and looked out at the garden in the dark, at the bare stalks of the sunflowers holding their positions in the November wind, and I thought, they will come back. And then, because it was nearly 5 o'clock on a Friday evening, and I was a 60-year-old man who had spent the last 3 months rebuilding something worth keeping, I went to the refrigerator and took out what I needed for dinner and started to cook, the house filled with the smell of it. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Down the block, more porch lights came on. Somewhere a child was calling to someone, and the someone called back, and the evening settled over Queens the way evenings settle over places that have been lived in long enough to know how. I stood at the stove and I was fine. More than fine. For the first time in a very long time, that felt like exactly enough. They told me to sit at the other table, so I did. And then I built my own. Looking back, I was the one who allowed this to happen. I confused generosity with obligation and silence with peace. If you are doing the same thing right now, carrying someone else's life on your back while they forget you exist, don't wait for a ruined shirt and a restaurant table to wake you up. Family Stories revenge does not have to be loud. Sometimes it is simply stopping, changing the locks, closing the account, choosing yourself. God has a way of making things clear when we finally go quiet enough to listen. That night alone at that small table with a bowl of soup, I heard it. My opinion, family drama revenge is not something to be ashamed of. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect made visible. If the people who claim to love you only show up for what you can give them, then what they love is not you, it is your usefulness. Family Stories revenge and family drama revenge are everywhere, but so is the choice to walk away with your dignity intact. If this story moved something in, you leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. A final note. Some stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and education. If this type of content is not for you, that is completely okay. Please feel free to explore other content that better suits you. We respect your choice.